Hello YouTube, I'm Kit Knight, and let me ask, do you recall having ever encountered any of the weird Minecraft Kids books in the past? Books like Diary of a Minecraft Zombie, The Secret Treasure, Diary of a Warrior Villager, etc. Well, when I was in elementary school, I know these books were pretty popular, and I can remember going to the library and checking some of them out on a couple occasions. And of all of them to exist, there are a couple recurring authors that stand out. We got Skeleton Steve, Zag Zombie, and then, of course, the one who I'm going to be talking about today, Winter Morgan. So some of you have probably seen Winter Morgan's books before. She's made quite a few popular Minecraft books, such as An Unofficial Gamer's Adventure, The League of Griefers Adventure, The Lost Minecraft Journals, and a decent bit more. But what I think most people probably don't realize is that she actually went and wrote some Terraria books a couple of years ago. I say a couple of years ago, but it was like a decade ago at this point, I think. Now, when I learned that she had made some Terraria books, I, as a pretty big Terraria fan, was pretty intrigued by that idea. And that was, I think, around 4 years ago now, and I actually went and bought all of her Terraria books. And I was very interested to see what they would be like, and I was definitely in for a treat. To give a little bit of a history on the book series, Winter Morgan, the author, started writing Minecraft books due to her son's enjoyment of Minecraft. And you can assume that that might have been the same thing for Terraria. Maybe he had a little bit of a Terraria phase. Well, the series was first made September of 2016, so yeah, around a decade ago. And that was a little bit over a year after Terraria first had its 1.3 update. This series was entitled The Tales of Terrarian Warrior, and follows Miles, the main character, as he explores the land of Terraria. But I'm not just trying to inform people that it exists. I'm making this video because the series isn't really very accurate to the game. I mean, it's by a Minecraft author, and I thought who better to analyze it than me, who's played but a little bit too much Terraria. So, without further ado, let's get into the book. Alright, so the story begins with the protagonist Miles digging in the dirt. It's not really clear if Terraria is a game in this world or not, but Miles claims that he's wanted to be an adventurer his whole life. And immediately that brings up an idea that the series doesn't really ever address, and it doesn't really seem to care about it either. The entire series is kind of treated like a video game isekai, except it never really talks about the isekai part of it. It makes a point to say that it's like a new and unfamiliar land, but never really talks about where Miles came from. But back to the story, as Miles is doing his digging, he can see the ocean from spawn, which I don't know if that's something you could actually see all the way from spawn, but sure. But as it starts off, Miles kind of already knows that he can craft items in third biomes for him to explore, and then he meets the guide, Matthew, and then he also disses the 1.3 copper short sword, which pretty valid. That's just true in 1.3, and he does the only actually good gameplay decision in the whole series and uses his copper pickaxe to defend himself. And the guide introduces himself as Matthew, and Miles calls himself a noob because Minecraft author. And then they actually have a decent conversation where Miles agrees to build him a house, and then the game accuracy continues to drop off pretty significantly. Miles starts mining a tree with his pickaxe, which I guess mining wood has been kind of inconsistent in Terraria, but never been able to chop down a tree with a pickaxe. After Miles gets this wood, the guide tells him to make walls and ceilings for the house out of dirt, which works, I guess, but it's a choice. Then Miles randomly hints at a traumatic backstory that's never brought back up. He says, "I like it. It's beginning to look like a real home. I've never had a real home before." Then Matthew responds with, "Really? Why?" And he says, "I don't want to get into it." And yeah, they never bring that back up. Then Miles angers some green slimes while chopping some wood, and the guide is just randomly really good and just destroys them all immediately. As Miles crafts torches from the slimes and struggles to craft a chair, he notices the dungeon and the old man in the distance. The old man talks to him and is like, "Hey, you should free me from my curse." And immediately after, 2 sentences later, he's just like, "No, you can't free me from my curse. It's too dangerous." Which, sure. Miles decides to head home instead and runs away from the horde of zombies because it's now a blood moon, and the zombies break down the door of their house, which not something zombies can do. They can open it during blood moons, but they can't really destroy it. They then go and fight all the blood moon enemies, and they destroy them all. And I think it's a good time to mention that Winter Morgan loves the word destroy. She uses it 71 times in this book, which not really important, but I thought I'd mention it. Matthew then teaches Miles how to craft wood armor and weapons. And then after they kill a couple demon eyes, Matthew tells Miles it's all of the items that he needs in pre-hard mode. And in that, he talks about how floating islands are only accessible after defeating Skeletron, which was once the case when they were required with golden keys, but that stopped being a thing in 1.2, which was 3 years before this book came out, so I'm not sure why she would think that. And then, in the middle of the night, they get the message that a horrible presence is watching you, which is another instance of them not really know if it's a game or not, because they're just the message appears, which makes it sound like a game. But it doesn't really specify anything, which is just kind of confusing. And also, this happens in the middle of the night, and that message always happens at 7:30, so right when it becomes night. So I'm not sure why that's happening, but And also, Miles does not have the 10 defense and the 200 health that you need for the Eye of Cthulhu to spawn. So there's a lot of things wrong with this, but I digress. So long story short, Miles dies, big surprise. The Eye of Cthulhu spawning on a player's first night when they have just wood armor, not going to work out too well. Then Matthew acts like you can only get an anvil from the merchant, which I guess she doesn't know you can craft them. And then the book kind of does predict a 1.4.5 edition, where Miles gets the message that the merchant wants to move in. And so he makes a house for the merchant, purchases an anvil, and a hammer, which not something the merchant sells, but okay. And Matthew and Miles return to the dungeon. Now at the dungeon, Matthew says that the keys to the floating island are in the dungeon, which, feature that got removed multiple years before the book came out. Then Miles summons Skeletron and dies immediately. Another big surprise. And don't you worry, this is the most he struggles throughout the entire series. After his two obvious defeats, Miles is just really impatient and whining to Matthew. So they go and search for gold ore, try and get tools, and they find a singular vein of ore, and they use it to craft a gold broadsword and full gold armor, which a single gold vein is not going to give you enough ore for that. And now with his super powerful weapons, he goes to fight Skeletron, and he completely destroys him. I'm not going to say this is impossible, but for a new player, that would be really hard to do. I don't know if I could do that. At least it would take me a decent bit. But then Miles descends into the dungeon, meets Shelly the mechanic, who isn't bound and also, I guess, wears glasses in this world. And then Miles finds the golden key, and Shelly tells him that it can only be used to go in chests, and he needs a different key for floating islands. Which, if you're a Terraria veteran, you might remember, you might be like, oh yeah, they needed keys for floating islands, but those were golden keys. There wasn't some special floating island key, so I have no clue where she got any of that from. And regardless, at this point in the game, when she made this, that feature had been removed multiple updates ago. As Miles continues through the dungeon, he gets a couple more keys and unlocks 2 golden chests. And he gets 1 item from each chest apparently, which he gets some really, really nice dungeon loot, like a swiftness potion and shoe spikes, neither of which are being a primary item found in dungeon chests, and shoe spikes not even being in them at all. After finding these incredible objects, Miles also noticed a sparkly floating island key on the ground. Then he runs out of the dungeon with Shelly to try and go to the floating islands, but then when he tells Matthew of his plan, Matthew's like, no, we're going to the corruption today. But before that happens, Miles builds a house for the mechanic, and then also meets the Dryad and is randomly really rude to her because she has green hair. But then Matthew explains why the Dryad is useful, and he uses the Minecraft term mobs when referring to monsters, and very, very much showing that Winter Morgan usually writes Minecraft. But Miles does build the Dryad a house, and her name is Lila. Then Miles and Matthew head over to the corruption and pass by what they refer to as the meteor crash site, which Makes it sound like we've talked about it before, but we have not once mentioned it, and they haven't even broken any shadow orbs yet, so it couldn't even have spawned. And for reference, if you don't really know, before 1.4, meteor spawn conditions were just like you had to break a shadow orb or Crimson Heart and it would spawn, rather than the boss. But then, looking back in context, it also seems like that meteor line probably should have been placed somewhere else, because it says, Matthew led Miles toward the meteor crash site. Miles was shocked at the size of the dent. The force of the landing creates a large impact, Matthew said. And that line, I think, was meant to be placed in the following chapter when there is a meteor that they go and mine. And that's just kind of a weird thing to happen, but, I mean, it's not really, I guess, an inaccuracy for the game due to what happens in the next chapter. But as they approach the corruption, Matthew says that he has one vital weakness, and says he can't go to the corruption. So then Miles is all on his own. And on the surface, he finds a shadow orb, which he does smash with his hammer, and then he nearly smashes another, but then he hears his friend screaming and runs back home. So then, when he gets back to his houses, he sees the NPCs fighting goblins, and let me remind you, Miles has not increased his health in the slightest, and the goblin army, like the Eye of Cthulhu, requires you to have at least 200 health, which Miles definitely doesn't. And also, it is implied to be daytime when he sets out for the corruption, and the goblin army only spawns like right at 4:30 AM when it becomes daytime in-game, which would mean Miles would have had to been at the corruption for like a full day for this to really make sense. I don't think that's what was meant to be the case. But eventually they're victorious and defeat the goblin army, and Miles finds the goblin tinkerer on the surface, and then he builds a house for him, and Miles, Matthew, and Lila go mining to try and get some money to afford rocket boots. And Miles, of course, is a true intellect and starts mining with his axe. Doesn't address this, he just starts mining with his axe. But eventually he finds a chest, which only has coins in it. Then Miles' group notices that a meteor is falling, and they see it, and it almost hits their house, and they run over to make sure everything's okay, and everything's okay. Miles then buys some rocket boots, and Matthew pulls a random lore drop that NPCs don't respawn like players do, and when they die, they get replaced and sent to other people's worlds. And honestly, I kinda like this idea. It's a way to make the NPC spawning back with different names kind of work, and I think there's a lot of potential to make them like somewhat immortal beings. They've been living from dozens of worlds, having to start back from nothing over and over again every time they die, and I kind of dig that idea if it were done in a good book. But back to the meteorite. In preparation to mine it, Miles grabs a wooden pickaxe, which is something that does not and has never existed in Terraria, but Matthew tells him to get a gold one instead, because I guess he has enough excess gold from that one vein they mined earlier to craft a gold pickaxe. And it was probably somewhere around here that the aforementioned misplaced meteorite quote was probably meant to go. After mining what Matthew views as a sufficient amount of meteorite, Miles gets the okay to go to the Flynn Island, so he puts on his rocket boots and flies up there, which is not something rocket boots have the flight capacity of, which he does actually fail the first 2 times, but on the 3rd attempt he does fly high enough to reach the Flynn Island itself. Also, when on the failed attempts, he falls into a lake and equips flippers that he apparently got at some point, never been mentioned before, and will never be brought up again. After he reaches the island, Miles does get a message that he got an achievement, as one does. Then he kills a couple harpies, gets the lucky horseshoe, and gets murked by some other harpies. Once he respawns, another goblin army shows up, which statistically unlikely, but not impossible, assuming we ignore the not have enough health for them to spawn in the first place. But then they manage to defeat the second wave without a whole lot of trouble. And here Isaac, the Goblin Tinkerer, and Lila, the Dryad, have Matthew reveal a secret he's actually hiding from Miles. Because when Miles owns the Wall of Flesh, Matthew will die, and no guide will return to take his place. Which, not true in game, but honestly, I don't really mind. I kind of like this too. It makes sense, narratively, that once you enter the latter portion of the game, you won't need a guide anymore. And if it was a Terraria story I had an emotional connection to the characters too, I think it could be a decent concept to do. And Miles, after hearing this, claims he doesn't want to defeat the Wall of Flesh because it would mean it would kill Matthew. And I think having this sort of conflict can be pretty interesting. But then all the NPCs are like, no, it's a necessary step. And then even Matthew's like, no, yeah, you can kill me. And Miles is just sad and he kills a group of slimes. Then it becomes nighttime and then a bunch of zombies show up. And then, as what happened earlier, Miles feels that an evil presence is watching him. Or, he doesn't feel an evil presence is watching him. He gets a message that he feels an evil presence watching him. Like, I feel like it'd be so easy. It's just like, Miles, like, felt like someone was watching him or something, I don't know. And then, as has happened multiple times in this book, it does not happen right on time because it just kind of happens in the middle of the night when that message happens. And not how that works. And still, Miles does not have the 200 health required. Though, I guess he does have the 10 defense this time, compared to the last time where he had 4, compared to the 16 he has now. But then this is one of the weirdest moments in the whole book, because when the Eye of Cthulhu spawns, there are 2 eyes. It almost feels like the author knew that the Eye of Cthulhu existed, and then also knew that the twins existed, and just like mixed them up in her brain without double checking anything. But Miles defeats the eyes, gets another achievement, and then they just kind of started referring to it as the Eye of Cthulhu, acting like there's only one eye, so I don't know what's going on there. But then Miles just goes and helps his friend defeat some zombies. And then after this, Miles wants to make the demon bow, which he physically would have gotten enough demonite from the Eye of Cthulhu. It requires 8 bars. You get, at very least, the bare minimum is enough to make 10 bars of demonite, but Matthew tells him he doesn't got enough, and he has to go to the corruption anyway. So then they head over, and they meet Jack the Demolitionist along the way. Miles heads over, finds some surface demonite, as one does, and then he gets jumped and killed by a couple of Eater of Souls. And then, now he's back home with the demonite that he mined, and from the Eye of Cthulhu, and Matthew is still like, nah, it's not enough, which, no, I don't know what he's talking about. And then, guess what? Another goblin invasion, which, again, statistically improbable, but like, I guess technically possible. But then Miles dies, and his friends just like easily kill all the goblins while he's dead. And then, despite having defeated Skeletron and the Eye of Cthulhu, and 2, technically 3 goblin invasions already, he's just like terrified of going and fighting the Eater of Souls and the corruption. Also, Matthew earlier was like, nah, you don't got enough for the demon bow. To prepare for going to the corruption, Matthew's like, alright, let's craft the demon bow. I don't know what he's on about. This book makes no sense. Miles goes back into the corruption and mines some more surface demonite, and then mentions that the corruption chasms won't benefit him till hard mode, which, that's just not true. Then he goes and kills a couple more Eater of Souls and then runs home to find, you guessed it, a 4th goblin army attacking his friends. Which, also, given the time of day, shouldn't have happened because Miles once more left for the corruption in the morning. This 4th goblin army is apparently the largest they fought at this point, and while they're fighting them, the goblins actually kill Lila, the dryad, which I did not at all expect. And that's something I do gotta commend this series on. Characters will die. And I don't know how many books that are like this would actually kill off as many characters as this series does. But eventually they defeat the 4th army, and Miles is sad about Lila dying, but they go and meet the new dryad. Her name's Isabella, and she's honestly, I think, a better dryad throughout the series. But after introductions, Matthew tells Miles that it's time for him to fight the Wall of Flesh. And Matthew instructs Miles on navigating the underworld and finding voodoo demons to summon the Wall of Flesh. And then he bids Miles adieu for the last time. While exploring the underworld, Miles notices Hellstone and comments that Matthew told him he wasn't ready to mine it at this point. Which, given his tools, he's not, but like, if he's this point in progression, he's gonna need that to mine hardwood ores, so I'm not sure what his plan is, because he never mines the Hellstone, and instead he just goes and finds the voodoo demon, kills it, and summons the Wall of Flesh, killing Matthew forever. And then he fights the wall and wins, which, I don't think I could do that with, remind you, gold armor, gold broadsword. But then Miles remembers Matthew told him to grab the pun hammer and break a demon altar, and describes it as a benefit of hardcore mode, which, that's not what it's called. It's not hardcore mode. And then on his way home, Miles meets Cedric the Wizard, and Miles offers him Matthew's former house, and Cedric refers to himself as Miles' guide to the world of magic, which doesn't really use a lot of magic in the next coming books, but like, It's a fun use of the word guide, I guess. And then Miles and his friends celebrate their victory, and they're like, "Oh no, so sad about Matthew." But then Miles is excited about what is to come. And there you have the first book in Winter Morgan's Tale of a Terrarian Warrior series. It's a wild ride, to be sure. I hope you found this whole video interesting in some way. And I would like to say, I may have dogged on the book a whole bunch throughout the video, but it's actually kind of fun read. I'd recommend checking it out if you feel inclined to. And there are 3 more books in this series, so if you would want me to cover the rest of them, do let me know in the comments. Or if there's some other Terraria book that I ought to check out. I do have quite the collection already. But I guess that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.